That's a first.
So today we're going to be looking at the archaeology and history of Cymru. This is the new series, the new season of lectures. And today we're going to be looking at Hillforts across Cymru. And across Cymru, there are literally hundreds of Hillforts. And across Britain, there are in total recorded and ones that we are aware of around 5,000 Hillforts across the whole of Britain. The name Hillforts is a bit of an anathema, really. It's the name for a number of evils. There are Hillforts across Britain that were that housed animals and four-poster structures to keep the likes of baby goats, kids safe and away from foot rot, and to keep chickens off the ground. And there would be great silos of grain at these places. Cattle would be stored in the winter months and that type of thing. And there'd be one or two huts to look after the local tribal people's resources, basically. Some Hillforts were occupied by numbers of people. But most of these locations don't have any sources of natural water. So it would be quite incredible to live on one of these locations without natural water. So most of the Hillforts that we do think of across Britain were used for keeping something rather than locations for people to live. So I've made that clear. The word Hillfort, these are locations usually on hills or upper areas. Are they forts? The answer is no in most cases. They're just basically to keep something in or to defend something. The sense of the word fortification really springs to mind. A Roman fort, for example, where the Romans would have various sets of banks and ditches and defenses. These were, in lots of cases, very different from that. But I don't think we really want to get too further into that today. So this wonderful site that we're actually looking at is a site known as Tria Kerry that I actually visited with Michelle and my daughter a few years ago. And it was an intriguing, enigmatic, spectacular site. And it actually took us an hour and a half to actually climb up the slope into the hill fort. Some smart Alec decided that we were not going to go along the footpath that takes 20 to 30 minutes to go to the hill fort. We're going to actually climb more or less up a diagonal to vertical slope. That's why it took so long to get up there. But we were able to understand the majesty of such location at Tria Kerry, which is on the Clean Peninsula. We look down. This is very different than most of those hill forts that we find across Britain. This is a hill fort that was actually the home to a group of people, rather than keeping animals safe in the winter months. And you can see the hut circles down there. And we did actually plan to organize a trip to Tria Kerry, but we deemed it sort of very much inaccessible, because even the actual footpath up to this site isn't one of the easiest footpaths to navigate. So what we're left with is looking at this and just getting a feel for this site. And the video that I'm going to show that my daughter filmed with me will give you as much information as you so require. We are actually going to look at 6 sites today. And the sites that we will be looking at, we look at one in East Wales, we look at a site in Aberystwyth, we look at several in South Wales, and we look at one in Oswestry. So it's quite widespread, this one today. But by far, we haven't covered, you know, all the great ones. I've just sort of done an overview of 6. And as somebody once said in one of my lectures, after 5 or 6 weeks of looking at hill forts, she said she was all hill forted out. So there's only so far you can go with hill forts without sort of getting extremely repetitive. So that's where Tre'r Kerry is. It's actually on the Clean Peninsula, the wonderful Clean. The Clean Peninsula is a very rocky outcrop and a very old rock associated with northern Cymru itself. And the one thing that we do know is there are a number of these upland areas that have got these types of sites. And later on, they were either used in the early medieval period, the period of King Arthur and the Dark Ages. And then we look into that they were redefended in the Norman period, or they were the last refuges of those rebelling against Norman rule into the 12, 13, and 1400s. So they've inevitably had various different uses over the years. And this lecture has a little bit of a link with next week, reuse. And when you look at that, we actually saw this aerial view when we went there, and we thought, there's no climby slopes, except we didn't look at the one that we've just seen. And it looked fairly flat, but we realized it wasn't that. And when you actually get into the site at the top here, you actually look down, and it's quite spectacular what you're seeing. And lots of these roundhouses see different periods of use, which is rather interesting. And lots of these roundhouses are very similar to the ones that Peter has seen with me at Holyhead. Bill has seen with me down in Cornwall, and other localities, the stone-built roundhouses that you would usually associate with open settlements in valleys and farmsteads and so on. Now, this is what we're talking about, and it's interesting that you can actually see a tall, powerful structure around it, around the interior circuit. You can actually see another wall around here as well. It's an archaeologist's nightmare to excavate. And the reason why it's an archaeologist's nightmare to excavate is basically all you've got is rubble. So you've got to make the decision whether that stone is a bit of wall, or it's not a bit of wall, or it's something else. So it's excavating stone, which is, on usual archaeological sites, you're excavating a stone wall, and either side of it, you've got mud, which is great. This site has actually been archaeologically excavated, but not as well as one which we're going to actually look at in East Wales. We're not going to go on to Dunraven yet, but that's where we're going to go after. So what I'd like to do is I could actually have the sound on this next bit, but I'm actually going to talk over it. So Bill, you should now be showing you should be showing a video coming up, and you can actually see the full video with me doing the narration. You can actually see that on my channel. So I'm gonna see if I can enlarge full screen. Bill, is that full screen?
No, not yet. There we are. Full screen now. Okay,
so what we're going to do, this was entered into a film festival because this is what they wanted. And here we go. So around the landscape is completely rugged. It's sort of set within a range of mountains. And it's actually on the clean, and you can look at this windswept, swept landscape. We've actually come up from the slope behind, and I'm actually standing on the wall of Tria Kerry. You can actually see it from the road, and this could be said to be one of a large range of occupied hilltops across the whole of this landscape, not necessarily just from this period. And what I'm describing is basically the majesty of this site, with the large number of circular roundhouses. And we put this video together from a number of little bits of film. And the problem is with me actually placing this over onto the sound of the video, is it's rather windswept. So I'm just going to move on a little bit further, and that's as it's looking out to sea. And what you can see is this is the wall around it. I'm actually standing on the wall itself, and you can actually see the humble bumble of the walls into the distance. And over there, you can actually see one of the roundhouses, and it's it's quite naked, really, because when we think about roundhouses, and as the wall stretches down there, as you think about roundhouses, you always think about roundhouses being hidden and buried. And as we sort of sweep around here, you can see more of these roundhouses. We're on top of that tump that we actually saw. And you'd need to get down from that tump to actually understand more of the site. And these are, as we actually go down, you can actually see that this is one of the entranceways into the fort itself. And you can imagine when the archaeologists were moving the stone there, it would be a differentiation between the wall and not the wall. So this is very interesting. And this is, if we go, hang on a minute, I just want to, this is very interesting because if Bill remembers, this might be an Iron Age site. If Bill remembers, though, a place known as Barn House, when we go to the likes of Orkney, the Ness of Brodgar, what they had was a collection of buildings around sort of central points. And that was in the Neolithic period. And this is what we're also seeing, for example, in the Iron Age across our wonderful land. So you've got all these buildings around the outside, around a central courtyard area. And one thing I was actually saying here, and you know what? We're going to actually come on to the sound. This is when I'm actually making sense. So what I'm going to do, Bill, is I'm going to ask you if you can hear the sound from the video. And go. Tell me when you can hear me speaking. Can you hear me, Bill?
No, nothing.
I'm basically saying that the site is a bit of an anathema, in that it's in that when you look at this, it's a very confusing site. What you can see in this round house is a linear wall, and in lots of these round houses into the Iron Age, the round houses are from the Iron Age, but when you go into the Roman period, it's almost as if these people are taking on the Roman way of building, in that you actually divide the building with a linear wall that goes through the middle. You sort of separate these. So that was an innovation. Bill, if you can remember, when we went to Scotland, the first thing we heard was Julie inside the Broch, and she was saying that this Broch has been divided. It was originally a large circular structure, and then you've got a wall that's been built across the center of it. And when you start to divide the roundhouses, they're more later in time than we actually have these earlier roundhouses. So a division is an innovation. So as I'm going into this building, I'm describing how tall these walls are, and you can get an idea how tall these walls are against me. Some of these walls are about 1.5 meters in height. And if you excavated further and deeper into these buildings, they would be actually much deeper and much more of the wall surviving. This isn't one that's actually got a division wall in it. And what I'm describing there is, I think what I'm saying is that when they excavated this site, they obviously come across a lot of Iron Age material from over 2,000 years ago. But what they also come across associated with this site was actually artifacts from the Roman period. I think they found 1 or 2 Roman brooches as well. So these people were trading with the Roman populations, for example, at Saguntium, Carnarvon, which isn't a great distance away. So as I'm sort of going on, again, I'm describing that you've got other buildings that you've got the sense of collapse associated with them. But the point is, with the division inside these roundhouses, you can actually see that there's a division there. And this is, why is this so important? Why am I even pointing this out? The reason why is that Hillforts just didn't finish in use when the Romans got to Britain. In lots of cases, hill forts had another use. What they did, for example, at Maiden Castle, was that they removed the sense of this being a great storage depot and removed the roundhouses, and they made it into one sort of farmstead area, and they actually built a temple at Maiden Castle. Well, this site at Tria Kerry continued from all the way through the Iron Age into the Roman period, and there's lots of talk as well of these types of sites going into the post-Roman period continue to be used. But naturally, there is that problem with this site in a sense that the source of water is actually going to be from rainwater. So you're going to need large storage vats to actually store this water. And again, what I'm talking about is the gravity of this site, the Great Wall around it, and all the sense of ruins here. So I thought it was really appropriate actually showing you Tria Kerry what these types of sites actually look like, to give you some sense of meaning to the other images that we're actually going to look at. So what I need to do is, I know Pat's a great fan of mine, and I know Pat will be joining us on Friday to do the YouTube thing. So what I'll do, Pat and everybody else, I'll send you the link for this video as well as the one for the petition. So what we're going to do, we're going to go off that now, and we're going to go on to Maiden Castle, if I may. So, Bill, I'm going to change this again.
Ah, my mistake.
You shouldn't actually be seeing that at this minute.
Well, that's the one in my stake. Yeah.
That's the one in my stag. I told you one would be familiar. So this is what we've been looking at with Tria Kerry, and you know, the entrance way that I showed is actually that way there, but there are a number of other entrance ways, and the roundhouses that we were looking at were these ones and these ones down here. So that sort of gives you a sense of meaning to these sites. So what I'd like to do is move on again to a site that's going to be very familiar to actually all of us, even you, Pam. And we're going to be looking at Dunraven Hillfort. And I do have a map where Dunraven Hillfort is, and we've actually already done it, haven't we? I think so. Well, there was a map showing you where Dunraven Hillfort is. It's along the South Wales coast. It's in the Vale of Glamorgan. It's south of Bridgend, south west of Cowbridge, for those that want to build a location. Now, this has got something very different from Tria Kerry, and is trying to fit a lot in here. And the difference with this and Tria Kerry is that a large section of this has actually been eroded away. It's likely that it may have been something like this at some point, right? The red line. So at Dunraven, since the Iron Age, we've lost at least half of the hill fort. And the one thing along our coast, most of our hill forts that are along our coast, we've seen extensive erosion. These hill forts on the coast were not on the coast. They were actually inland. Lots of the ones on the coast, the one, for example, at Nash Point, that may have been at least a kilometre inland. This was probably extensively inland. Sully Island as well, that's only a fifth of the original area, and so on and so on. So these are very different from Tria Kerry. These are the classed as the coastal hill forts. Even being a kilometre inland, they're still more or less coastal, compared to Tria Kerry, which is up on top of a hill. When you go to Dunraven, it's a very strange experience. And why it's a very strange experience is that, I don't know if any of you have been on a walk with me up there, but when you get to the top of this brow, you think you're going to go off the end of the cliff, and then suddenly it just drops down. It's a really weird experience. And on to another, it wasn't originally called Witch's Point. Witch's Point is more or less a modern name. So that's a bit of a red herring there. Also red herrings as well. Over here, there are actually pillow mounds that look like defences, but they're not. But the great set of defences are actually here. You can't see them at all. But we will actually see an aerial view where we can actually see these defences really, really well. And another point to be made is directly when we look at the other slides, is quite clear. This itself is Dunraven House. Dunraven House was originally associated with the Bottelier family. And then the daughter of the Bottelier family married into the Vaughan family. Then it moved into the Wyndham family. And this is still owned by Wyndham Estates, except the castle was demolished in 1963. And we've actually found out the real reason why it was demolished in 1963 was that there was a plan to turn this into a caravan park, and Dunraven Castle was going to be retained as a utility block. The council rejected the application. The Wyndham family then offered the house to the council. The council didn't want it, and then it was all the good stuff was taken out of there. It was demolished, and that was it. So you can't blame the Wyndham family for what happened. Or then again, maybe you could. Right, moving on quickly. Let's now the point I wanted to make is actually lots of hill forts are occupied by medieval locations, by medieval fortresses. And this could actually be classed as one where it's quite an imposing site, quite a dramatic site. And this is what remains of the much later remains, nothing really to do with the hill fort. But this is the image that I wanted you to see, right? And the reason why I want you to see this is lots of interesting points, but these are the humps and bumps. So the only way to actually understand these is to go up from the footpath, follow this along here, and then up here. And we do believe at these locations, the reason why you've got gaps through the defences, this is where there's been archaeological excavations which slightly destroyed the defences. However, and Bill, I know I'm using the word defences a lot, but it just makes things flow a bit better. And I know you can probably understand that. Those are those pillow mounds. They're not defences. And all this has been eroded away, and it's still being eroded away. And in the far distant future, this will one day be an island, because this is how the erosion's going. It'll erode it and create Bull's Nose Witch's Point as an island. Another interesting point is that when I do my ghosty walks, I always stand by here and I talk about the Wyndham family and the Vaughan family and shipwrecking and all the rest of it. But you look down and this ditch actually continues all the way around, and it's actually been kept. So you can actually see the defences, and actually with lots of these hill forts, there are more than one defence. You can actually slightly see the inner scarp there. So you've got one defence, two defence, three defence, and what's this referred to as, Bill? What type of hill fort?
That is a multivalent.
Correct. If it had a single bank and ditch, it would be a univalent, two ditches, bivalent, multivalent. We don't really have a trivalent. Where does this tie in? We're doing the archaeology and history of Cumbria. Where does this tie in with the topics that we've been doing? And it ties in quite nicely, because think of it. Before the Romans came to Cymru, and before it could even be called Wales or Cymru, the population of this land was very much like the population over the border. And don't say it, Pete, because you can't, because I haven't even got your mic on. And what we usually think is that there was a central hill fort, and there would be farmsteads radiating out from it. So the farmsteads would be in the valleys, the hill fort would be in the middle. And what would happen, in theory, is that all the animals in the winter months would be brought to the hill fort, where there would be lots of rain, and there would be lots of ability to keep the animals in water. And they would be kept here over the winter months, keeping them safe from wolves and other people. And also, one of the big reasons why we've got banks and ditches, and some people might laugh at this, but it's starting to get into people's mindsets, is that the reason why you've got all these elaborate banks and ditches is to keep the humble fox out. Because within these hill forts as well, they would keep large numbers of chickens, and they would keep piglets, and piglets would be very vulnerable to cold weather conditions, and obviously very vulnerable to a fox. And you'd keep kids in there, not your humble little children, but kids in the old word, goats. And the whole point was to actually keep foxes out. And if anyone's ever kept chickens, they will know that one fox can wipe out a flock of 150, 200 chickens in one evening. So you can imagine, you need to keep those animals out, and you need to keep what's in there safe. So this is the point. Tria Kerry is very different in that lots of the people actually lived within the hill fort itself. But then again, the process was the same, that the idea was that the hill fort was the center of a little mini tribal kingdom of about 150, 200 or more people. And this is why we've got 5,000 hill forts in Britain, because each tribe would have a hill fort. We're not talking about those fictitious tribal names that we think of, the Dumnumni of Cornwall, or the Demitai of West Wales, or the Suluri of South Wales. What we're talking about is the small tribal peoples, the real tribal peoples that once existed, not the names that the Romans actually gave these areas because they couldn't pronounce the local names. Moving on. So looking at these images, it's very odd that we've seen one image, and then we're looking at this image, we can't find any of the banks and ditches. And this is typical of archaeology, that you can look at one angle, you can see something, another angle you can't see anything. And I thought hard of how I'm going to start these new 8 lectures, and I thought what I need to do is do some other areas that I've not touched upon, and I just wanted to do this because this very much links to the origins of our people. And I haven't got an image of it tonight. And I've moved on to Oswestry, but I haven't got an image of it tonight. But one of the key things that I've said, and I'm going to reiterate, is that the archaeological evidence tells us that lots of these hill forts in the Roman period were reoccupied as grandiose farms. We've got wonderful evidence from outside Cowbridge in the Vale of Glamorgan at KARL-JAMES of the reuse of the fort by a couple of farming families in the Roman period. And we've got lots of Roman evidence. And actually, I'm also reminded of Dinas Powys as well. The wonderful Dinas Powys hill fort. And as Pete will tell you, it's not a hill fort. It's there was actually no Iron Age hill fort at the Iron Age hill fort of Dinas Powys. What am I on about? Well, at Dinas Powys in the Vale of Glamorgan, there's lots of banks and ditches around a central hillock. Those banks and ditches were dug after the Roman period, after it had been an Iron Age settlement with no banks and ditches around it. So the point being is lots of these had a use after the Iron Age. So they're not just, what I'm saying, they're not just Iron Age sites, which is a really important issue. Now, I think this is a rather interesting locality. And it's an interesting locality because it takes us to somewhere else. We've looked at Dunraven on the South Wales coast. We looked at Tria Kerry. And the whole point of these lectures is to get you out into other places. Oswestry. When I went to Oswestry Hill Fort, I didn't take any notice of where I was going. And I actually thought Oswestry Hill Fort was in the middle of nowhere. Actually, Oswestry isn't far away at all. And I can remember parking, whoever I was with, we parked over here. We had a good old jolly look at this hill fort. It was really interesting. And by the end of it, we were hill forted out because you're going up and down banks and so on and so on. And I wanted to check this one in here. It's believed to be here that Karaticus II, if Karaticus did have a battle up here, this is the locality that Karaticus fought against the Romans at Oswestry Hill Fort. It's local folklore, but I want to throw that one in. If anyone's ever come across this site, which is rather important that we actually place this into history. And there it is, Oswestry. Weirdly enough, when you're here, you can't really, unless you look at the right angle, see Oswestry. But when you do actually see Oswestry, you think, bloody hell, I'm so close to it. I'll be careful what I say here, because lots of these hill forts are nowhere near modern day towns and cities. For example, Maiden Castle is a whole mile away from Dorchester, but I wouldn't say that was close, but it's a good trek if you're walking. This one is actually quite close to Oswestry, but it didn't continue in use after, say, the 500s-600s. And it's a site that saw a great deal of change, and there's interesting interpretation associated with this locality. And if we move on a little bit more, this wonderful aerial view, and you can't see it, or maybe you can. I'm not even going to test you on this, but this site was actually, you know, when I said this was never used after the 400, 500, 600s, right? For living, it was used for agriculture, and it was also used in the First World War. Bill, this is going to be unfair to even ask what you could strange can you see at the map, at the aerial view, but that there is a trench system. They use this to practice a warfare in training for the First World War, and that's an interesting point as well, because what we do find is that there are one or two hill forts along the South Wales coast that were used for target practice in the First and Second World War, and as locations for training in the First and Second World War. And we've actually got the evidence at Oswestry as well. So, Bill, if you ever get your detector out, Bill, and you go detecting here, which would be a criminal offence because it's a scheduled ancient monument, Bill, I'm painting you in a completely wrong way. But say you were the type of person who went metal detecting, you would be likely to find unexploded ordnance.
A good reason for not doing it.
Yeah, exactly. Now this is interesting. For one level, and it's a shame I can't. The time has really come on already, but because we started a bit later, we've got a good 30 minutes left, I think. But anyway, lots of these hill forts are built in stages, and archaeologists like this word period 1, period 2, 3, and 4. I'll boulder dash to all that. This site evolved over a long period of time. Lots of these hill forts evolved from the Bronze Age, about 700 years BC. Other hill forts just developed at low rises on the landscape. Maiden Castle is a low rise on the landscape. It started off a little hillock, then it sort of got bigger and bigger. This is a low rise on the landscape. This isn't the likes of Tria Kerry or a promontory hill fort, such as the one at Dunraven. But what you can see is lots of intriguing changes and lots of banks and ditches being constructed. Now, I wouldn't call anyone an idiot for asking me this question, but if they said, well, what's the point in all the banks and ditches in the first place, right? And the answer is really, really simple. And I'll give you the answer if we move on a second, whilst I keep that thought in my head. Brilliant. Snow brings out features on a hill fort perfectly. This is still Oswestry. If you go to Maiden Castle, which is a 50-acre hill fort in southern England, near Dorchester, there are descriptions that the defences were so brilliant at the front that the Romans simply went in around the back and just walked into the hill fort to attack the defenders from the rear. And you start to think that that's absolutely nuts. You know, why can't you defend a hill fort like this? You can't really defend a hill fort like this because the true gravity of it's a large site. So to defend a hill fort like this, you need literally hundreds and hundreds of people to do it, to hold the defenses. And it's not doable, considering the thousands of hill forts there are in Britain. So if you think there's 200-300 people associated with a hill fort, they would need to defend their hill fort if they're to be defended against attack. Then you're thinking you need to divide the numbers of people, and then you start to get the fact that you can't really defend these things at all. So what are the defenses for? Well, they're to show off. Lots of things in history and archaeology are to show off. So, say for example, right, Bill builds his wonderful gateway at Llangynoed to compete with the gateway at Chepstow Castle. And the guy at Chepstow Castle tries to compare his castle with the castle at Caldicot. And the people at Caldicot say, our castle gateway is far better than Newport. And the ones at Newport say, well, bugger that, we're going to build a greater Barbican in front of our castle. Lots of these buildings of castle are garish displays of opulence. And the same thing can be said about these hill forts. Or the words should be similar, because we don't really know how these people thought. Now, I found this by complete accident tonight. I thought, wow. Yes, I did find this image tonight. This is really fascinating because it shows of a much later use of the hill fort. And you can think, well, I'll tell you one little bit of a tragic story. What they would do, they would probably send a regiment to Oswestry from Scotland, and they would send the regiment from Oswestry sort of to Cumbria, and the garrison from Cumbria would go to Penally, which is actually quite accurate, actually. And they would send them to practice ranges far away from where these people lived. And the reason why is that they were using live rounds. And even before soldiers actually got to France, they had been killed on these practice ranges. And what would happen is that you'd have two people given a telegram in the street, say in the Rhondda Valley, right? And the boys' regiment from the Rhondda Valley would have probably practiced in Kent. So you got two telegrams coming home. Both telegrams would say, we're sorry to announce that your son was killed in combat in Flanders. A week later, the one neighbor would get the body back of their son, and the other neighbor wouldn't get the body back. And nobody would question this. And the answer is, the body that didn't come back from France was actually somebody that died in France. And the body that did come back was the person who died in Kent. And obviously nobody cottoned on to this. And if they had, there would have been a great controversy. But I thought I wanted to chuck that in as just a little mellow, tender note to see these sites as being relevant, because they are relevant. They're not just nature reserves or places that haven't been used for thousands of years, which is an absolute nonsense. And I can actually remember this locality. I stood there. My God, I think I know the person who actually took this image. But anyway, it's so. I remember standing there, and I remember looking at, seeing all the ferns. It was, and then you get all hill forted out, because the problem is when you're at a hill fort, your orientation goes. When you go to somewhere like Maiden Fort, it takes you 10 minutes to walk around the whole top of it. Bill, am I talking out of hand by saying that when you go onto a hill fort, you get completely disorientated a site like this? Or am I wrong, or am I right?
You need to walk on the perimeter on the top to get your bearings first. That's the
Yes.
first thing you do. And then you can picture then that everything comes together from that.
But if you just stand where you are, you don't have a clue, do you?
No, you've got to explore to get your
Exactly.
bearings, yeah.
Exactly. Fascinating site, really fascinating. This one on Oswald Street. It's well worth a visit. And look at that, woohoo, a modern ancient. And what I was talking about was just to give, this is a nice little aerial view to sort of give us an idea. What we do find in the archaeology is that you might find a little farmstead over here, and another farmstead over here, another farmstead over here, another farmstead over here. And what these farmsteads do would radiate out over a landscape of about 500 acres, which is usually the same acreage as a manor or a parish boundary in the medieval period, which was ranged between about 500 and 700 acres. This is all based on this. So this idea, this Iron Age landscape, or for Peter, this Celtic landscape, Peter, is actually the same landscape that is being reinvented in the medieval period. So we've got a lot to think about when we think about these localities. And Bill, you know this site. This is that wonderful site that Bill sneakingly said earlier on, Ir Borarach Hillfort, which is completely the wrong pronunciation. Ir Bulwarach Hillfort. You say
Bulwarkai. Bulwarkai. It just means bulwark, that's all.
Okay, bulwark as in the bulwark in the Vale of Glamorgan. So Bulwarachai, yeah?
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Bill. So Bulwarach Hillfort stands on a broad spur of Mynydd Margam, Bill's territory. And this is not far away from one of those standing stones that we looked at the other week. This is a type of fort known as a hill slope fort because of its non-defensive siting on a slope, which is overlooked by higher ground. So in other words, this site is overlooked by higher ground. So if you want to think about, I think Bill's point earlier on is are these truly defended hill forts? Are they to be used to defend against your neighbors when in fact it's overlooked? So those are those sort of, those are those problems that we get with it. It's not a massive hill fort, but it's fairly sizable. So what you've got in the middle, you've got what's known as a small central enclosure, which is no more than just under an acre in area. And around that, you've got banks and ditches. Now, my interpretation would be that the central area would be the area that was defended first, and then, or enclosed first. That my notes, I'm not actually reading my notes in front of me, and it actually uses the word enclosed. It doesn't use the word defenses. It says, in addition, 3 further widely spaced and concentric lines of ramparts surround the central enclosure because it's been enclosed, this time enclosing a much larger area of 4.5 hectares. So there's 2.5 acres in a hectare. So that's just around 12 acres in area. So the archaeologist who's writing this has actually bowed down to the word enclosure rather than defensive, which plays into what we've been saying. It's one of those sites that's not really been excavated. In fact, there's no records of it being excavated. We don't know much about it. And this is described as a non-defensive hill fort. Even though
Indeed.
this is the point. This is the point you made, which is really important. I like lectures like this, which are not clear cut.
Carl,
you say something. Go for it. Please say something.
Yeah, Carl do actually go there every few years just to monitor erosion and nothing else. But as you rightly say, there's been no excavation carried out at all. And if you look at the lower left of the picture, you can see this square.
Yes.
Formation. Now, early maps, early historians and antiquarians believed that to be a Roman camp, a Roman marching camp. But because there's been no excavation, obviously you can't prove that at all. But that's the common belief in this part of the world.
Yeah, this is the point. It's very well. Actually, do you know what I've been doing recently? Is getting a line that's very linear, isn't it? and it
It is.
breaks through the earlier defences. So
Mm.
that's a really good point. And actually, there's a similar site like this in the Vale of Glamorgan at Tythegston. And that's the one that overlooks the sand dunes. A very similar site like that. Yeah, you are very, very right, Bill. And really, yeah, go on.
And there's an adequate supply of water to the right, that little valley there,
Yes.
the Cumcertain, there's a fast flowing stream there, so ample water supply.
And have you ever tasted the water there? I'm sure you have, Bill.
It's clean.
Good.
Of course it is.
Of course it is. It's spring water. Comparisons with excavated examples suggest that Ir Boracay was occupied with the dates that we've been talking about, roughly from about 300-400 years before the birth of Christ into the Roman period. It has been suggested that this type of hill fort may provide some evidence of a pastoral economy in the area. And this is the point I've made. These widely spaced defences may have acted as protective stock enclosures for cattle. The scale of the ramparts and ditches clearly show that great effort was expended in building this locality. However, within societies where cattle was highly prized, their safety would have been of paramount importance. And that's the point exactly the point I've been making. The paramount importance of what you have as your wealth. These were the banks. There's actually there's a play on words there, isn't there? These are the banks of the day, right? So these are where you would keep your cattle. And also, we don't have lots of gold in Cumbria at all. Even though we've got the mines at Dolocothoy, it's quite likely that lots of the gold at Dolocothoy was refined by the Romans after the Iron Age. But that's another lecture altogether. We've got an in-joke in Cumbria with my Cumbria class that there's so much gold in Norfolk because there used to be gold mines in Norfolk, but there's no evidence of gold mines in Norfolk. So that's a bit of an in-joke. So this is a really interesting locality, and you could say enigmatic. And it's got a bit of everything, really. It's got the trees, it's got the valley, it's got the water, it's got the banks and ditches. And there it is. And it's very near Llangffordd. And it's within Bill's loved Maesteg Valley, is Linvi Valley. Now, this is, again, rather interesting. So from the notes, it's saying that if you think about it, this is a site of enclosures with enclosures and various divisions and whatever this is down here. Without excavation, we can't really understand what this site is about. Again, this is a LiDAR image taken using the new technology. So they're really recent image, actually. And again, showing you a little bit more from the valley side. And again, it would be intriguing to know more, but skills and understanding of archaeology are moving on. There's even new techniques being introduced to say that I will never get my trowel out again. And that's not a joke, because we will be able to virtually excavate an archaeological site without taking anything out of the ground. To be honest with you, that would be a fairly good idea. Again, this is another sort of oblique image. And what we do find is, again, what we're talking about, all the varieties of enclosures here, and this one over here, and you've got an outer enclosure. So very interesting. But if you're down on the ground, you don't get an idea of this. And even with a map, it'd be very difficult to get a proper orientation, a proper understanding of this site. So we've got 2 sites to go, and it's 8:37, but we did actually start late. So if everyone keeps with us, then that will be very much appreciated. This site itself is Pen Dinas Hillfort in Aberystwyth, right? Because this is another one that basically overlooks Aberystwyth. Very strange site, very interesting site. I've never been here. So we've got, I've been to Oswestry, I've been to the likes of Dunraven, Tria Kerry. Bill's been to the likes of the last site, which I can't pronounce again, but I've never actually been to this one. So very interesting site. We've got a reconstructed drawing associated with this one. And look at this, look at the entranceway. Now you look at this and you think, what is going on? It's a bit overboard. And to be able to defend the site like this, you need a large army to do so. And you're thinking, well, what are they actually doing here? Why are there different bits to it? And one thing I actually didn't mention at Dunraven was that at Dunraven, in the front of the fort, the bit that you actually clamber up into the fort at Dunraven, there's something known as the Annex. Usually lots of these hill forts had annexes. This here is classed as an annex, an outer area, which is usually defended again. And I think the artist here has actually really played into my mindset and the author of the other piece's mindset. And that mindset is that the only thing you can actually see here is animals and things being stored and a load of defenses. So we'll leave that where it is. So again, this is a very strange site. Look at it. It's just like a sausage along the ridge. It's a defended sausage. And I tell you what, best of luck for any wolf or anyone who tries to break in here. It's going to be very difficult to actually get into this site. And what this artist has done is very intriguing to me. What they've done, they've put a couple of buildings in this, right? These are the buildings that would be associated with those people looking after the animals, and nothing more, nothing less. And again, where there's defended ridges like this that we see all over the place, it's a site to put something like this. Michelle said to me, and I'm chucking something else in here, I don't know if any of you have been up to the church at Llantrisant. When you go to the church at Llantrisant, if you look over, there's you look at the church, you look north, you look south into the Vale of Glamorgan. If you look over towards the east, there's another raised area which is higher than where the church is. And Michelle's always said, why didn't they build the town over there? Why didn't they build the castle over there? Because it overlooks the landscape and there's nothing there. And you might be able to think at one stage there may have been a hill fort over there. There's lots of hill forts still to find. We have actually found a hill fort with the Barry class, but I'm not going to tell you where it is. We will let people know where that hill fort is associated with Barry when we feel it's appropriate. So there are others out there. And what I'm going to do is read the description. Do I use this image? I'm just going to see if we've got anything else coming up. Right, that's the one we're just going to do last. Let's look at this, and I'm going to read a little bit of spiel because I'm sure none of us have actually visited this site. I'm presuming that none of us have visited this site. Pen Dinis Hill Fort. This is a hill fort which is actually smaller than the one at Maesteg. 3.8 hectares. That one was 4.4 hectares. And it is one of the largest and most important hill forts in West Wales. So it's fairly large. And this was excavated like the one at Llanmelling that we're going to actually look at in a few moments. This was excavated in the 1930s, 1933, 1937. And it sees, which is rather interesting, occupation, desertion, occupation, desertion, occupation, desertion. So it's being used for different reasons over a long period of time. And what they do find is they found a total, and that's all, of 12 house platforms. Now, you would think this is being used, if this is being developed permanently as the main site for the occupation within the landscape, there'd be a lot more houses. And I'll answer a question that's going to be going around your minds. Wouldn't it be better to actually live at a location like this? And the answer is no, because who's going to look after your animals in the valley? Who's going to look after your crops in the valley? You're going to live with your crops and you're going to live with your animals. So this is going to be used to keep everything safe and as a last resort, maybe. These sites are not absent of archaeological evidence. As we saw with Tria Kerry on the Clean Peninsula, we do find archaeological evidence. Various different pottery. pottery that's actually come in from the likes of Herefordshire and Worcestershire. So material has been imported into this site from other localities, and we know they've got pottery for storage and so on. And weird links. There's trading links, because this site has actually got a link with Somerset, because glass beads that they've got from this site are actually exactly the same beads as have actually been found at the Mere Lake Village site in Somerset, that you can actually see a reconstruction of at the Guildhall in Glastonbury. Most of the Iron Age settlements in the area around Pendinis are much smaller and are enclosed with single banks and ditches. Pendinis may have been an important trading centre, I've just said it, or home of a local tribal leader that kept everything safe. Unfortunately, there is not enough evidence at present to be confident about its precise character and use. So that leaves things open. So what we're going to finally do is we're going to finally look at images associated with Llanmelin Hillfort in East Wales. There it is. And it's very interesting because there's a military base alongside it. This site has been excavated a number of times. And the project officer that used to work for Archaeological Economy, Coralie, actually excavated at this site as well. There's Llanmelin Hillfort near Shire Newton, in the county of Gwent. We had to do something in East Wales for once. There's the military base. And it's a very strange site to go to, because there's a big fence around a big chunk of it. But you can actually look at this site. It's rather interesting. The banks and ditches are rather eroded away. And we've got lots of archaeological evidence for this site. So I'm going to tell you the archaeological evidence, and then we're going to call it a night. We've done pretty well tonight, actually. And next week's model will be that what we will do, we will look at not the Roman forts, because the Romans weren't Welsh, were they? And they weren't Cornish either. And they were definitely not Celts. But what we are going to do is we're going to look at Roman forts and the settlements associated with the Roman forts, which will tie nicely into these people at the Hillforts, which are the same people, actually. Llanmelin Wood Hillfort is a small but important Iron Age locality with 3 sets of banks and ditches, making it multivalent. It's very near Caerwent. So it's an oval site with bits running off it. It's got an annex, as we've mentioned. So if we look again, this is the annex here, and this is the main hill fort. It's only 3 hectares in area, so it's just over 10 acres in area, but it's nevertheless an important site associated with the surrounding community. In the early 1930s, Llanmelin Hillfort was the focus of intense activity. It was excavated by Sir Mortimer Wheeler in 1923 and was improved by V.E. Nash Williams in the 1930s. And what we're talking about, the work improved. There was more survey and excavation work in the 1930s. And work did actually take place in 2004 and 2015. And what we do find is that there was an earlier fort, dating somewhere probably around 200 years BC, probably a lot earlier as well, into the period before Jesus Christ, and then obviously into the period of the Roman occupation of Cymru. And what they found is lots of evidence of trade. They've actually found pottery that's come all the way from Glastonbury, which is great. And it's a high status site, an important site. And the site is associated with 2 medieval longhouses. So in other words, the site was reoccupied in the medieval period. New community excavations undertaken by Cadw with Archaeology Wales between 29th of October and the 16th of November 2012, investigated parts of the Hillfort interior and defences and produced Roman finds into the 2nd century, so into the early period of the Roman occupation in the area. And they've undertaken other survey work as well. So what we're going to do, we're going to call it a day there. Is there anything you'd like to say, Bill, before we ask if there's any questions?
Yeah, from what you said, defended hill settlements may have two uses. One as a holding pen for animals, and one for habitation where people actually lived. Now, if that is the case, the people who looked after the animals in the holding pen would have to live close by. So you would expect two defended settlements to be close by, within walking distance, which isn't the case. So I think that this idea of it just being a holding pen isn't correct. I think it was a dual thing. The animals stayed there with the little settlement as well. They were all in one settlement together. That's the way I look at it.
So who would have looked after the animals and the crops in the valley? That's the problem.
But if that's the case, then yes, there would be another habitation, another settlement close by. But there's no evidence of having two close by within walking distance. What I can see.
Right, okay, Bill. What are we talking about? Are we talking about two separate hill forts within walking distance?
Yeah? Yes, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Right.
So the people who in one would actually be able to get to the holding pen very quickly to look after the animals, put them in quickly if you knew there were wild animals, wolves in the area, etc.
The point. Yeah, sorry to interrupt. The point of us archaeologists is that we see, when you look at something like Maiden Castle, it's vast, right? And to keep Maiden Castle going, you would have needed dozens and dozens of farmsteads to actually keep Maiden Castle going. And the problem is Maiden Castle and the next hill fort from Maiden Castle is some distance. So all that space is occupied by farms and little people, the vulgaris, and that's what we're talking about. The hill forts were the central axle of the community, like a manor house, like a manor house in the medieval period. That's what we're talking about.
So if that's the case, they weren't defended themselves. It was a small little settlement. Would they be defended, I wonder? Maybe they just had a palisade fence around 2 or 3 roundhouses together, for instance.
Yes. Well, I'd say, yeah. Well, basically, when we in the Vale of Glamorgan, when they put the road through the Roman and Iron Age sites in the Vale of Glamorgan, the Roman site at Witton Rossa, in the Vale of Glamorgan, underneath that was an Iron Age farmstead, right? And that Iron Age farmstead had a bit of a ditch around the outside, but it started off without a ditch around the outside, right? And then down the road, you've got a similar site at Moulton, and then you've got lots of these things. And then the nearest hill fort is quite some distance. But nevertheless, there are lots of hill forts within the area. This is a big debate, this one, but it's all different points of view, which I'm really respect your point of view, Bill. And there's lots of different ways of looking at this. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So what we're going to do, we're going to stop screen sharing. And who have we lost? No. Pat's still there. Oh, right. No, we haven't lost anyone. Oh, right. Sorry. There was only 5 of us to start off with, wasn't there?
Yeah, that's it.
Pat, are you fast asleep, Pat? No, she's not. Right. Pete. Yeah, go, Pete. It's your turn to talk, and then we'll have the girls.
Well, on Monday, we looked at those similar places in South America, and we looked at they could possibly be used for containment of the livestock, as opposed to be for defense, either defense or containment.
Yes, that's a good point, and we'll be looking at that tomorrow. Exactly. Yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you for that, Pete. And Pam?
Just to say that when we first grew up in our early years, we lived very close to Oswestry, very close to Welshpool.
You've lived everywhere.
I know.
Oh, you were part of a military family, were you?
No, my dad worked on the railways. He was my stepfather, and this was at Buttington, which is outside of Welshpool.
Buttington, what does that ring a bell? Don't know.
There was a station there. We were brought up on the station.
Oh, right.
But I haven't actually been to Oswestry. But my brother, I believe, was born in Oswestry. I'm not sure. But we were close to Oswestry. But I've not seen the Hillfort till tonight, which is good.
You didn't play on the railway tracks, did you?
Oh, I did.
So
How
did
did
I.
you know that?
Yeah, I did as well. I did as well. And the good thing is to put an old penny on the railway track and see it flatten out. That was great. I've actually tried a pound coin since, but we'll move away from that one.
Yeah.
It doesn't work with a pound coin. I'm telling you now, it just don't work. Right, okay, Pat.
Oh, I really enjoyed it. It reminded me of that trip we took, the Hillforts and down Cornwall Way. Remember we took a Hillfort trip? We stayed, didn't we?
Yeah, that was that was a very bizarre trip. All of us in the car. There was a lot of friction. Yeah, exactly. Do you know when? Yeah, so that we won't go into that, but yeah, that was a very strange trip. Anything you would like to say, Pat?
No, just thank you very much. It put it in perspective, and I understand it better now. You know.
Good. Maybe we should have done the lecture back then. Right. Okay. What I'm going to do is just a couple of announcements. I don't know if any of you are aware that on the 21st of August, which is a Friday morning, we're going to be out and about in Lantwick Major, and we're going to have a little meeting, and we're going to have a little walk, and we're going to bring some books along and a little get together. So that's on the 21st of August. That'll be me. That's not part of what Rosamond does with a portable library. And obviously anyone interested, we got a UNE Ghost Walk on Friday, which I'm really hoping it's going to be raining because that'll really give atmosphere. Yeah, anyone else got anything else to say before we go? And I will be seeing Pete on Monday with John, and Bill tomorrow, and Pam tomorrow, and Pat tomorrow. Anything else anyone wants to say?
Yeah. When is the portable library? When is that?
That is, I do believe, this Sunday, the 16th at 1 o'clock at Lantwick Major. So the portable library and the get together with Rosamond. We've got a little grant to sort of pay Rosamond to do some work on the ground. So that's she does it. She's a bit weird, Rosamond. She does her regular libraries every 3 weeks. She couldn't do it 2 weeks, could she? Or 4 weeks. She does it every 3 weeks. So I don't know what's happening. So basically, it's every 3 weeks, and that's this Sunday at 1 o'clock. Yeah, train station. Yeah.
And is that the train station?
Train station in Lantwick Major. Yeah.
Okay, right. Thank you.
And nobody from my stag because they might get their car nicked.
You don't dare forget that, will you, you beggar?
Exactly. And I got to be honest with you, Bill. Look at Bill's chest.
Woo!
I know.
Woo!
Oh,
Hey, come on, Pete,
Anyway.
get naked. Come on.
It's like a
Ah!
sauna.
Oh, look at that. Oh, my God. Oh my God, yes, yeah. On that note, as we've all got excited, I'm going to call it a night. Nothing else to say. So thank you for joining me tonight. I really appreciate that. Pete, Pam, and Bill and Pat, this is going to go out on YouTube. And we obviously got Friday as well on live on YouTube at 1 o'clock as well. So thank you very much. I'm going to say good night. Night night, Pete, Pam, and Bill, Pat. Night night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good
Night, everyone.
My
Bye.
pleasure. See you,
Bye.
Pam.
Bye.
Up the Reds. That's good. Stalingrad, don't forget it. Right, that's Bill. Bill always hangs on. I'm gotta remove him now. Stop recording.